Welcome, everyone, to this podcast series. The purpose of this series is to discuss some of the biggest issues we face in the world today and issues we may face over the next decade. We're not here to solve these issues, just to bring them into focus. Alongside this series, we are running an online residency program called Tech for the Public Good. We're working with artists, creatives, and academics from around the world, and they are prototyping solutions using technology and creativity for one issue that they will collectively decide upon. The conversations in this podcast series are aimed to inform their process and get them talking about their own experiences or prompting creative responses. The three topics we are discussing in this series are mental health, gender equality and women's rights, and climate change. And today we are talking about mental health, and we're bringing together a group of amazing individuals, and we'll be putting to them some of the questions raised by our cohort of our Tech for the Public Good group. Today we have myself, Matt Allen, who is the creative technologist at Leeds 2023. I'm also joined by Adam Saskoronsky, who is also a creative technologist who I have a job share with, Dr Siobhan Hugh-Jones from the University of Leeds, Kate Goldring, the Business Development Director at Leeds Mind, and Johnny Benjamin MBE Mental Health Campaigner. So I wanted to start by asking you all to just do a very brief introduction to yourself. So I'll start with me to kick us off. I'm Matt Allen. I am, as I said, the creative technologist at Leeds 2023. I'm also a digital artist and make work about anxiety from a lived experience. And so, Adam, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name's Adam Saskoronsky, and I could pretty much say the exact same thing as Matt. I work at Leeds 2023 as a job share with him as a creative technologist, and we also work or run a company called Close Forum, which is our arts practice where we make work on mental health, and more specifically, we had a project this year, which we created called Anxiety Arcade, which is a full-sized arcade cabinet that is playable, and it's about a 20-minute experience.
Dr. Siobhan Hugh-Jones, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hi, nice to be here. So I work at the School of Psychology at the University of Leeds, and I research all aspects of teenage mental health in particular. And I also work in some low and middle income countries, so exploring very different cultural influences and possibilities in terms of how we can support young people's mental health.
Thank you very much. Kate Goldring, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name's Kate Goldring. I am mum of one, Leeds resident, born and bred. So quite appropriate I'm on this chat. I have my own lived experience of mental health after struggling with postnatal depression around almost 9 years ago. He's nearly 9 now. Really passionate about the subject, and now also work in the mental health sector. And I'm Business Development Director at Leeds Mind, a local mental health charity.
Thank you. And Johnny Benjamin.
Yeah, hi, I'm Johnny. Really good to be here. I also have my own lived experience of mental health issues. Was diagnosed with a form of schizophrenia when I was 20. And now I'm an author and a filmmaker, and I have my own youth mental health charity called Beyond, which is a national youth mental health charity.
Thank you so much. It seems like we've got a great group together, so really excited for the conversation. Also, just to say to people listening at home that we are recording this podcast over Zoom, so apologies if there's any beeps, dogs in the background, cats jumping on our laps, things of that nature. I'm sure we're all very used to that by now, and we are hoping that this just be quite an informal, casual conversation between us. So we have some questions that have been put to us by participants of our Tech for Public Good program, which we thought we'd start with these as conversation starters. So the first question was raised by one of our participants from Ghana, and they said, in parts of Africa and areas across the UK and the world, mental health issues are not given a lot of importance, as they're sometimes considered not real issues. There can be a lot of stigma attached to mental health issues. Even without the pandemic, good quality mental health was difficult to access. and the costs were often prohibitive. So how can we make mental health healthcare available, convenient, accessible, and affordable to typically underserved populations? So I thought maybe we could start with Kate with that question, and then we'll pass it around and see what we get from that.
Yeah, no problem. Happy to kick things off.
Thank you.
And I couldn't agree more, really. You know, we're in a position where we have communities that are drastically underserved by mental health services. And my take is sort of a local take. I work in Leeds, we're a local charity. And as we move into our next strategy period, which sounds very corporate speak, but for 22 to 25, some of the key themes that we're already identifying is in this area. One of the things nationally that Mind's looking at is the importance of being an anti-racist organisation and engaging with communities that are traditionally underrepresented in mental health services. So interestingly, I found some stats around Leeds, and we come fifth in the estimated population distribution of young Black men in England and Wales, which is a specific target group for us. And the research shows that young Black men are 3 times more likely to be at risk of suicide and 6 times more likely than counterparts to be sectioned. So there's obviously some issues there already. So through consultation with other groups in Leeds who already engage with these communities, we've identified that there's a real need for young Black men to have access to early preventative and culturally sensitive support. So we've set up our Young Black Minds programme, which is aimed specifically on a peer support model run by someone who has lived experience of mental health difficulty, who is a young Black male himself. And we set this up for young Black men aged 16 to 25. And there's so few things going on like this in the city at the moment. There's some great pockets of work going on, but it doesn't feel that joined up. So for us, this programme is a way of really engaging with those underrepresented groups in the mental health sector. But there are some great things going on around Leeds and I'm sure the world, but seeing those statistics in this day and age, I thought was really, really surprising. And the fact that, you know, stuff like this isn't mainstream already and we haven't tackled these issues already was really surprising. So it's a great programme. Unfortunately, we've only got 2 years funding for it, which is always the way in mental health. It's just as we get going with it, we need more funding. But, you know, so far so good. And the peer support model for us, with lived experience, run by someone who can engage with the target group that they're talking to, is key. It's pivotal to its success.
Great, thanks. I want to pass that over to Johnny and see if we can get any other perspectives on this.
Yeah, it's such a big topic. So much work to do. I went to India 3 or 4 years ago now to do some work there, and I was working in an orphanage near Mumbai, and a lot of the young people in the orphanage suffered from trauma. But I mean, even the literacy, even the word, there was no language for it there, you know. So we had to start right from the very, 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 very beginning, you know. So stigma is still a massive problem, still a massive issue. Definitely, I know, you know, in the UK, I think we've definitely seen a reduction in stigma. Still got a long way to go, but through, you know, amazing things like the Time to Change campaign, which was run by Mind and Rethink Mental Illness, you know, we've definitely seen a reduction in stigma. But, you know, that's not the same across the world, and I think we need to be really mindful of that. So I was doing lots of just very basic sort of just education and training with staff at the orphanage and other communities as well in Mumbai. So need to start from the very, very beginning. I was very naive, I think, going there and thinking, oh, I can do this and this and this and this. We can put this in place and that in place. But no, we have to, you know, really start from the very beginning. So my key thing is collaboration. You know, this has to be collaborative. In the UK, what we're doing is my charity, we have set up the UK's first kind of national database of youth mental health providers for schools and colleges, because, you know, schools and colleges, they often don't know where to go, where to start looking for help. We know there's long waiting lists for, you know, traditional mental health services. So we need to look at other ways we can bring support into schools and colleges. So that's what we're trying to do. But again, it's all about collaboration. So whether it be in the UK or on a global scale, it has to be about joining forces and collaboration. Too often in mental health, things are so siloed. You know, one person's doing one thing here, another person's doing another thing here. So often what I'm seeing actually in the mental health space, there is more awareness and more campaigns and more organizations, but there's often repetition. And if we just came together and worked together, you know, we can make such a difference. So yeah, that's kind of always what I'm trying to sort of hammer home is the collaboration. That's the only way forward.
Great, thank you so much. Siobhan, do you want to pick up on that?
Yeah, sure, thank you. I mean, it's a really good question, isn't it? Because it's the reality of a lot of poorer countries where stigma and unusual, if I put it that way, unusual beliefs about mental health exist. And I think one of the questions about stigma is there's lots of different forms of stigma. So there's self-stigma and how you feel about yourself when you have a mental health difficulty. But there's also lots of forms of public stigma. And that's just not people, that's also employers and institutions and governments. There are all sorts of beliefs about mental health and false beliefs and misunderstandings that feed the stigma. And fear. Fear is a big one. People don't really know how to respond to somebody when they say, I have depression or I have psychosis. They don't know. So I think it's not just about individual stigma, it's cultural and it's structural stigma as well. And there's some reasonable good evidence that you can tackle stigma, but it takes a huge amount of effort from large organizations to deliver those. I think one of the things that we're trying to do with research that we're running in India is we're using young people to advocate, to start to change the conversation so that mental health is talked about in the same way as physical health. And actually just by talking about it, normalizing it, and that's one way to start to break down stigma. But there is also, I think, the real challenge of, as Johnny said, the mental health literacy, this idea that we just don't know the words, we don't have a good understanding. So mental health literacy is a very broad way to start to bring education to break down stigma. The challenge with that is we really risk bringing Western ideas of mental health to other countries and imposing a particularly kind of medical idea of mental health to other countries. So that's another challenge when we work across countries together on mental health, is to really be respectful and honouring of their ways of thinking about mental health and people's capacity to cope well with a mental health problem and live a good life with a mental health difficulty. The other point about cost, if I could just say about that, particularly for poorer countries, the only way that we know how to do this in our work is lobbying, and to really keep on and on and on, raising the profile, particularly of young people's mental health, and showing them what a return on investment you could get, because that's the way they think, a return on investment you can get by protecting young people's mental health in particular. So that's one way that we're trying to work with the kind of cost problem as well. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. Adam, do you have any follow-up questions from that or anything you want to add on, or shall I move on? Yeah.
No, I was just, that kind of made me think about in terms of our own education system. Do you think enough is being done from sort of early levels to talk about mental health? I didn't grow up in the UK. I grew up abroad in sort of multiple different countries, so I don't really know about the education system here. But do you feel, I've worked in university since, and sometimes I feel that there's not when I work with some of the students and talk to some of the students, I feel like they sometimes don't have the I can't feel that they don't feel like they've got the language to be able to talk about mental health in the ways that they probably should. Do you think there's enough education done in sort of early years and sort of schools to sort of enable people to talk about it properly?
I think my personal take on this as a mum is there's vast inconsistencies. I'm fortunate in that my little boy goes to the most amazing school where they take mental health really seriously. I've recently supported frontline workers around their mental health. And that literacy piece, having the words to be able to describe how they're feeling, understanding what mental health is. It's streets ahead from anything I had when I was at school, albeit I've just turned 40, so it's quite a while ago. But I think the inconsistency between a good school talking about mental health and a school that just ignores it and doesn't or does the minimum on the PHSE curriculum is vast. So for me, I mean, I couldn't agree more with what you both said around, you know, the youth side of things. I think prevention piece is the only way that we're going to have a literate generation around mental health moving forward, and have the capacity to be able to understand their feelings and manage their own mental health. So yeah, I think for me, it's the inconsistency. Some are doing it incredibly well, and I've seen that firsthand. And I've heard stories of other schools where it's just not happening well at all.
Yeah, I get so frustrated because so often I just see it as a tick box thing when, you know, when things do happen in schools. It's like I do various bits in schools, and it's like, Johnny, you've got 40 minutes, this one assembly, Tuesday the whatever of this, and I'm like, oh, come on, like, you know, I can't just do one assembly and just think that mental health tick, it's done. It's not just schools, it's workplaces as well. It's like, oh, we'll bring an external speaker in, we've done mental health, everyone's fine. You know, particularly again with the pandemic, you know, we have to change this way of thinking. And I'm not to get too political, but it's really frustrating that the government has chosen to focus so much on that academic side of things after the, you know, post-pandemic. You know, there's so, we're speaking to a lot of schools, and there's just so much pressure on teachers as well, you know, teachers and young people, because they've got to get back to, you know, where they were before the pandemic. They've got to catch up. And mental health is just ignored, not just the young people, but the teachers as well. You know, we always forget about the teachers, I think. And so, yeah, I just think we've got such a long way to go. You know, mental health and physical health. We talk about the parity of esteem between mental health and physical health. You know, they should be on a par. It's so far away from that. You know, if mental health was on a par with physical health, then we'd be doing so much more in our schools. Because if you think of, you know, in our schools, you know, we have sport. We do sport with our young people. We do physical health education. You know, it's compulsory and it's a big part of most school sort of curriculum. But mental health still, it's just, yeah, I don't know, it's just a bit on the side. So, I mean, it is great. I feel I'm really being really critical. As you say, there are some really good schools that are doing great work. There really are. But it needs all schools and colleges and universities to be on the same page for this.
Great.
Yeah, and I agree. And I think one of the things that I get frustrated about in terms of, you know, our schools doing enough, it's a little bit like, well, their job, they're not mental health professionals. They feel very fearful about saying the wrong thing, doing the wrong thing. There's very limited capacity. So I feel a bit frustrated in some ways when and I'm the same, I expect it also from my kids at school. There's a couple of things around this. I think we need to shift the conversation to not what we teach children in schools about mental health. It's about how we change school cultures to support well-being. So there's no point delivering kind of assemblies, which I do as well, but I'm equally frustrated as Johnny that you get half an hour. But I know they won't do any good. I know that, because half an hour of talking about, well, you know, feeling low is normal, or being anxious about things is understandable, you know, that just isn't enough. And I feel frustrated that we kind of are a little bit obsessed with a curriculum of mental health when we're not looking at the conditions that we're asking people to go to every day. That's actually the cause of many of those difficulties, not all of them, but many of them. So I'd rather broaden this conversation to really focusing on what is our school system doing, particularly to young people, particularly teenagers, where we know is a really, really vulnerable time for the onset of mental health difficulties. But also then to look at how can we have this stepped care approach where we can support schools to address some kind of light touch problems, if I put them like that, that could be helped relatively easily, but if left unhelped, might develop into something more substantial. So how can we really assist schools in that? So I think this shift in the conversation, I'd also like the conversation to shift from actually just talking about mental health, because I think we tend to think about mental health from a slightly negative point of view. We tend to think about mental health problem or difficulty, whereas the word well-being kind of broadens our lens to see this as a full spectrum. So we talk about mental health and well-being, suddenly new things seem possible, I think, rather than just correcting poor mental health.
You're so right. And I think talking about schools, and then you've both talked about how that extends into other establishments as well. One of my roles at Leeds Mind is to run our commercial training team. which I've rebranded Help for Employers, because training in mental health sort of doesn't feel right either. But we have so many people that come to us saying, we need a mental health first aid course. We need to train up mental health first aiders in our workforce. And 9 times out of 10, I'll drill down and there will be something that's happened in that workforce that has made them go, oh, we need to do something about mental health because things are bad in our workplace. Whereas actually, when you drill down, you talk about the culture and you find out a bit more about what the motivation was for that initial inquiry. There are so many other things that need to be done before they reach that mental health first aid system in order to create a culture where that mental health first aid investment will actually work. So I think this tick box thing, and we get a lot of schools contact us, and with limited capacity, we do the odd assembly, same as you guys, but it's not going to have that huge impact. So it's completely the same with workforce, and it comes back down to that question around literacy and understanding, and as you say, Siobhan, it's culture.
I think the conversation that we touched on there about well-being is something that leads into our next question about well-being apps and mental health online resources. From a personal experience, I started using well-being apps when I was already at like a crisis point, when I had like severe anxiety and depression, and was looking online for resources to support myself, possibly at the point where they were not as useful as they could have been if I'd started using them a lot earlier. So I just wanted to get people's opinions on online resources and the pitfalls of these, of having non-human interactions, but also the positives of them. And thought maybe we could talk about the two sides of that coin. Kate, do you want to start that off?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the pandemic hit and our offices shut and all our services stopped temporarily. And as a small local charity who've never really heard of Zoom or Teams that much before, it was a bit of a culture shock. So for us, we had to really quickly learn a lot about tech. We managed to get all our services pretty much online within the first week, which for us was quite the achievement, especially with the state of our IT support. So we managed to deliver a service online, which has had some immense benefits for a lot of people. There was still support available, and it's taught us a lot. Although it's not app-based, there's a real distinction between being in a room with other humans as to being in front of a screen. And at Leeds Mind, many of us have that lived experience of our own mental health difficulties. I need to reframe that word now, don't I, after what Siobhan's just said. And I'm not ashamed to admit this year has been one for me. I was seriously ill with COVID in July, almost lost my life. So when I came out of hospital on the 1st of August, this restart of my life, I accessed online counselling myself. It was more, I've experienced trauma, kind of need to do something to get ahead of it. And I accessed online counselling. It was virtual. And for me, that was a game changer because, well, I couldn't walk far enough or get out of the house enough to be able to access it. So it made it accessible. It made it just an hour in my week where I logged on and spoke to the most amazing woman ever. And it made a huge difference. So for me as a human, it was the absolute way forward, having that tech and that resource online. It was vital. But while it worked for me, it really doesn't work for others. So from my professional perspective, through the pandemic, how have we been supporting those who are digitally excluded? And I think that there's a real area there where unless you had the tech, so for those from deprived communities, we found that there was an absence of tech, particularly for young people, or for those who weren't tech savvy. So Zoom, again, for me as a 40-year-old was a bit of an alien concept, but I managed to get up to speed with it. But particularly some of the older generation, we found that there was a real skills gap there and a knowledge gap. So we quickly had to put together some guides on how to access Zoom. We invested in tablets that we could loan out to people who would be able to then access some of this online stuff, who didn't have the right equipment. So there's pros and cons, really, I think, from my own personal experience and from my professional experience. And we at Leeds Mind, we're adopting a real hybrid approach to how we deliver our support now. So both digital, face-to-face support. And we find that some people absolutely want the face-to-face support, but we find that some people absolutely want to do it from the comfort of their own home. But there was also issues around, is there a safe space, domestic violence in the home, someone accessing counselling where they can't engage in a way that's honest and truthful and beneficial to them. So online can be great, but it has its pitfalls. Face-to-face can be great, but it also has its pitfalls. So for us moving forward, adopting both and really taking some of that learning forward and hopefully moving a bit more into the digital world, into app-based technology and embracing that a bit more, I think will definitely be the way that we go.
Great, thank you. Siobhan or Johnny, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think, so looking back over my whole journey with, with my diagnosis, at the very beginning, I couldn't look at someone and talk. It was just, I was in a psychiatric hospital initially, and I had to I was in front of psychiatrists and I couldn't talk. I really couldn't talk. We've talked about stigma. I was really so embarrassed and ashamed, and I didn't have the language. I didn't have the confidence. So for me, talking therapy didn't initially, it just didn't help. I couldn't talk. So for me, writing was the thing that really helped. But that's changed over the last sort of 15 years as I've, got the language, got more confidence, the self-stigma is reduced. So now I can talk. And so the writing is not as helpful for me. But again, it fluctuates sometimes. If I have a relapse, I had a relapse last year, and again, I didn't want to see people when I had my relapse. So basically what I'm trying to say is I think there just needs to be a massive range of support available to people, like a real range. I mean, so with the charity, what we're doing is we're funding different sources of support. So, we'll talk to a school and maybe drama therapy will be something that's unlocks something for these young people. So we'll be able to fund some drama therapy, or maybe it's art therapy that helps. So, I get frustrated again because, so often we just focus on the more traditional ways of doing things within mental health. And we need to be a bit more open-minded. We really do. Because, you talked about gaming, didn't you, earlier on? That's massive for a lot of people, gaming, and that's another, it could be a way to unlock a key for someone. I think, we really do need a range of, I compare it to something like cancer treatment, and I know a few people going through cancer treatment, and, when I talk to them, thankfully, they've been offered lots of different types of treatment, support, and that's the way it needs to be for mental health. But too often it's not. It's very much like a one-size-fits-all approach. And that's something that needs to change, I think.
Yeah, and I completely endorse that technology or apps or anything like a digital approach is really helpful for some people in some circumstances. And I came into this whole area of research in terms of digital mental health really skeptical, actually, because we know the importance of relationships. We know that having close, empathic relationships is really, really helpful to lots of people. But I've come to learn, exactly as Johnny said, that lots of people actually find that quite difficult. And I'm thinking also particularly of autistic young people who don't really want that type of engagement with another person. So finding these other ways, and they actually seem to really enjoy a more digital approach. And we're kind of experimenting around virtual reality, gaming as well. We're developing gaming for young people who've been through trauma. And we know that trauma, the kind of key marker of trauma is that you want to avoid talking about it, and you want to avoid thinking about it, and you don't want to go to therapy for it. So actually getting people a little bit more comfortable thinking about the things that have happened to them via gaming, it seems like the most bizarre way to approach it, but that's what they've asked for when you kind of do research with young people. This is something that they would enjoy. I think the real benefit of something digital for young people is the privacy. Lots of young people are interested to learn and kind of do a little bit of self-help, but don't really want to burden parents or worry them, and just want to also maybe feel a little bit ashamed about what they're feeling because they don't know how normal it is. So I think there's lots of ways that they can help. However, the well-being app side of things, we know that they're less effective unless you have a need to change. So there's not much point in having a sleep app if actually your sleep is fine, or all that kind of stuff. So it's a bit like you were saying, Matt, that these tools become useful once you feel you're ready to try something and you feel an identified need for it. But the app market is kind of convincing us that we need to do all these things and have all these apps to feel better, and we probably don't.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think there's definitely a business side to like tech for well-being that I wonder like how much the focus is on the well-being and how much the focus is on the profit. We were one of the questions we had was about social media, and with that being so prevalent in today's society, especially through the pandemic, how do we protect ourselves from the potentially harmful effects of social media without just shutting them off? Siobhan, do you want to start with that this time?
That really easy question.
That's such an easy question.
Well, we're seeing this constantly get played out, don't we, amongst the major companies, and then society challenging them on what they're doing. So I think this is a long battle actually that we're in, and we have to keep it up. I think we have to take very seriously, very, very seriously, the potential for harm, but without throwing out the baby with the bathwater, because lots of young people, it's a vital part of their life. It's a very healthy part of their life. And I think one of the things that I'm interested in is a bit more responsibility from our social media companies. I'd like to see them help young people, particularly, register what social media is doing to them in the moment. Some way, an emotional awareness of, is this helping? Is this making me feel good? Is this bringing me down? And also almost like an algorithm that would learn what kind of content is actually not good for this young person. And so they just don't get it. But also to help young people to be more mindful, I guess, about like what's going on when you're reading this, when you're posting these things. Is this good for you? Is it not good for you? So responsibility that in partnership, I guess, across people and companies would be something I'm interested in. But it's I'm stating the obvious by saying it's really, really complex, because social media is vast. It's very different. People's use of it is very different. There's different levels of harm. So I don't think we can just talk about it's good or bad for people.
Yeah. Johnny, do you want to add anything onto this pretty easy question?
Yeah, I just think there needs to be so much more, education awareness, but not just for in terms of young people, but teachers and parents actually as well. So many times you talk to a school and a school will say, we've got this issue and the parents aren't dealing with it. And the parents will say, it's the teachers that should deal with it. And no one wants to take responsibility, or no one knows how to deal with it. I mean, some of these issues that come up are really complex and, particularly around actually WhatsApp. Talk to a lot of young people about WhatsApp. And I find WhatsApp even a struggle sometimes. I have so many different groups and I miss things in groups, and sometimes there's conflict on WhatsApp and I don't know what to do. And, for a young person, I think it's, that social interaction is so important, friendship groups and, people just don't know how to deal with conflict, tension on particularly WhatsApp, I'd say, or the other social media platforms as well, but no one seems to talk about WhatsApp. And I really do worry about the impact that's having on particularly young people's mental health. Again, I'd like to see, these companies doing a lot more. They're just not doing enough. I don't know. I think, again, we just got to keep putting pressure, more and more pressure. And eventually, hopefully, they'll take some action, hopefully.
Yeah. Kate, do you have anything you'd like to add to this?
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said. There's so many issues, and WhatsApp, particularly, Johnny. How often is your phone pinging with the amount of groups you're in? It's a full-time job in itself, but I do think social media has its issues. That's a given. I don't want to underplay that. But it gets a really bad reputation. And like Siobhan said, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. So through this pandemic, imagine if this had hit 30 years ago, the issues around social isolation and loneliness would have been absolutely, well, they're already huge, but it would have been exacerbated so much more by the absence of this tech that's allowed us to remain connected with our communities, connected with our friends, and connected with strangers in a lot of ways as well. So an example, one of my best mates lives in Melbourne. She lives in the centre of Melbourne, which was one of the most, I think it's got the title of the most locked down city in the world at one point. And she couldn't travel beyond 5k of her house. She lives on her own. She worked from home. At some points she didn't have work. So she was literally in this bubble on her own. Through the world of WhatsApp, we were doing WhatsApp phone calls regularly because she knew that I'd come out of hospital and she was on her own. And, so we connected in a way that was financially accessible, because previously when she first moved back to us, it cost a fortune to call her. She was engaging in a more passive way through Facebook, seeing what her friends are doing all over the world. So there's huge positivities there. The other positive effect for me around social media is that ability to engage with strangers. So again, I keep talking about personal examples, that's just me, but so post-COVID, there's a lot of stuff that I wanted to talk about that actually would be sort of almost give secondary trauma to the people that I love, because they love me. They would worry about me. So I was lucky enough to stumble across a COVID survivors group, which has been a lifeline. And I've engaged with these strangers on a platform that just wouldn't have been available to me all those years ago before social media. So that's been incredible. And I've also set up my own Insta feed, which is really anonymous. No one knows it's me, but it's all the sort of warts and all journey around COVID recovery. And through that, I've created this amazing community of fellow COVID survivors, long haulers, whatever you want to call us, who have this shared knowledge, these shared experiences. So for me, tech has been a real force for good in that sense. So yeah, there's loads of flaws. There's loads of issues around the censorship and standards and how the keyboard warriors are behaving and how divisive it can be around certain subjects. But there's some really good bits as well. So let's not lose sight of those.
Yeah, I'm also on some long COVID recovery groups, and without them, I wouldn't have been able to have conversations with people. I've been offered, support from across the world and been able to make sure I'm getting the right support locally. So I guess I'm just agreeing that there are definitely some benefits of social media that I'd never seen before, because I'd only really used social media in the past to keep in contact with friends and advertise events. And now I use it more for connecting with global networks. We touched on it a little bit throughout these conversations, but I thought it might be interesting to talk about how the perception of mental health or the provisions of mental health have changed through the pandemic and because of the pandemic, because this has been something that has affected people across the world. Johnny, do you want to start with this one?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting actually. Some people have said to me that obviously the pandemic has been absolutely horrendous for so many of us and everything that we've had to go through. But for some people that particularly struggle with maybe things like agoraphobia, having everything go online has been really helpful for them. Therapy sessions, individual therapy sessions, group therapy sessions. They don't have to go through the whole difficulty of having to leave the house and maybe take public transport or whatever it is. Or maybe if you live in a rural community where access to going to a mental health service is really tough, things going online has made it so much easier. Obviously there's as with everything, there's a negative, but it would be good to focus on the positives. For myself, my therapy went straight online, and it was great because I didn't have to travel there and back, and could just like this log on, 9 a.m. Wednesday morning, open my laptop and have that conversation. I mean, it's not the same. It's not the same as, you know, maybe being there one-to-one and it was strange at first, and I found it a bit odd, but you know, gradually got used to it. And actually, me and my therapist have agreed that that's how we're going to continue, you know, online, and it works for him, and it works for me, and it works for our therapeutic relationship. So there has been benefits, but obviously, again, there has been negatives. But I'm going to try and just focus on the benefits.
I would say that through the pandemic, like personally, my anxiety levels are the best they've been in the last decade. And I think that's, again, it's because not having to go outside is as beneficial for some people as it is awful for other people. So there's definite, like, it's good to definitely concentrate on some of the positives of the new ways of working and the new things that have like come to the forefront because of the pandemic. But obviously, there's also a lot of negatives. Kate, I wondered if you wanted to maybe touch upon the effects of the pandemic as well, from your point of view at Leeds Mind.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen sort of from an umbrella view of the changing mental health of the city, and you know, there's some scary stats really around depression throughout the pandemic. You know, with issues like bereavement, devastating loss of life. I mean, the figures that flash up every day are easy to say, but when you really think about the true impact, I think that's really impactful on our mental health. Impact of lockdown and now recession, you know, all the financial worries. Have I got a job? Is my furlough going to be throughout this, or are they going to make me redundant? You know, all these really scary things. And we know that people already struggling with their mental health or related issues like employment, housing benefits, and debt have probably been hit hardest by the coronavirus. But whilst the stats show that those already struggling with their mental health have been hit hard, they also show that a lot of people are experiencing mental health challenges for the very first time. So we're seeing a lot of adults who have previously considered themselves very resilient, and you know, there's a bit of an old school approach potentially to mental health, that they're actually reaching out for support and acknowledging the issues around depression or anxiety for the first time. So how that manifested itself at Leeds Mind in the first 3 months of the lockdown, our inquiries to our front desk, whether email, phone calls, messages on Facebook, doubled in the first 3 months from what we'd seen in the previous year. My take is that the issues that the pandemic have caused to the nation's mental health are yet to be realised. I think we'll see this in years to come. And whilst, you know, we're seeing that sort of momentum and people reaching out for help and those numbers increasing, I think there's a potential tsunami ahead of us, which the lack of investment. I mean, we've seen headline grabbing. There's so much money being put into mental health, but it scratches the surface. We're fortunate we've got a few services that really can respond and react really quickly to people who need help right then. So we're working on a grief and loss line, which isn't just about bereavement. It's very much around the loss of a job, you know, the loss of freedom, the breakdown of a relationship, all those sorts of things. So we've been working on that. And we have our peer support program, which we really work hard to make sure that there's no waiting list for. But then you look at the community mental health that's out there, and the waiting lists for things like IAPT, the lack of knowledge for some GPs, that inconsistency. I mean, again, a personal example, a friend of mine went to a GP and expressed suicidal ideation, very recent, and was told to go out and have a run. No follow-up, nothing. So for me, the impact is huge and we're not prepared for it. There needs to be additional investment in the voluntary sector, in the NHS, across culture and society, as that's the only way that we're going to be able to tackle this when we realise the full impact of the pandemic on the nation's mental health.
Yeah, and there's definitely going to be inequalities of the provisions available across the world as well, as we talked about earlier. Siobhan, do you have anything you'd like to add to this?
I'll just add that actually, and huge inequalities in the UK in terms of who's being affected by mental health in the pandemic and who has access to good support. It's a major embarrassment is completely the wrong word, but it's shameful. It's shameful that these effects are the burden of the pandemic on mental health is falling on disproportionately on certain groups. And of course, we don't yet know the long-term effects of long COVID on mental health. So we do, along with the things that Kate was calling for, I'd also say we need to keep investing in research about, particularly from a neurological level, about what has changed in the brain through COVID that could actually be impacting mental health across a range of problems from dementia through to depression. This needs rapid investment. Because I'm sure that we've got good treatments, we've got good medication for those who need it, but we need to understand what would actually work best for certain groups. And I think when sometimes people who have no lived experience of mental health difficulties, they don't understand why a pandemic would necessarily worsen your mental health. They don't get it. And we've been studying, and we're still studying first-year students who have prior experience or existing mental health, and to understand their lived experience. And they talk about the problem of too much time, too many thoughts, not enough structure. So when your sleep is chaotic and your day feels disorienting, it affects your mood, it affects the way that you think, you worry about new things, you feel differently about yourself, you feel more on the edge of society. It's a whole whirlwind of interacting effects that can happen in these isolating, bizarre circumstances that we found ourselves in. And actually, when you feel exhausted and you're not sure of yourself and you're not sure of the world, actually coming through that resiliently, as people like to talk about, it's just not doable. It just isn't doable for many people. So I think that there needs to be much more empathy and understanding about how the world is for a lot of people, and how that became so frightening, actually, for lots of people during the pandemic. So yes, as Kate says, we've got a long way to go in understanding the full-term impacts, but lots of ways that we could actually mitigate some of those effects if we act quickly.
Thank you. Adam, have you got anything you'd like to add to round off this podcast?
No, I think I completely agree. So from my perspective, I'm on the edge of finishing shielding, so I'm extremely clinically vulnerable, and I pretty much have not, apart from going to the hospital and going out for walks, I've not sort of been outside since March the 6th, 2020. So for me, it was initially a benefit, pandemic, because a lot of my mental health issues actually came from my physical problems, and I used to have a very physical job, and so from not being out, not doing all that stuff, I was able to actually take a moment back and sort of breathe and kind of take a stock check on myself, my feelings, and kind of, so it helped me. So for the first year, I think I was kind of actually feeling better because I was feeling better physically. But then the second year now, it is, as you say, stay with those thoughts. Kind of, I've got a very understanding and amazing partner who's kind of there for me the whole time. But it is that when you are kind of not being able to leave that space, you're in the same space the whole time, it does sort of, it's almost like a shadow growing on you, and it gets worse and worse and worse. And I think that is something that I know a lot of people that are still in care homes, a lot of people that are extremely clinically vulnerable still feel that, and they are staying away because they don't feel that the pandemic is over. We're still, for sort of people like myself, we're still in the centre of it. It's still something that it's probably something that we're going to kind of be dealing with, or I'll be dealing with probably the rest of my life. I have to now make the decision whether I'm going to ever go to an indoor gig again, whether I'm going to, and so I love this, I love going to gigs, but it's all those things, it's those mental choices I'm having to make now. Am I going to sort of not sort of risk my safety to do these things I love? So I think that's something that's going to be, for a lot of people, it's going to be a big choice for the rest of their life. And it's an interesting position to be in. And so it's kind of, processing that again, doing a big stock take and sort of where my priorities are in different things, which is quite an interesting thing to be able to have to do.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Adam. Does anyone have any closing comments, remarks? If not, we will wrap up.
I think I'd just like to say that I think Leeds is a fantastic place for talking about mental health. I think across all different sectors, I think it's doing a great job to keep us having conversations and bringing people like us together. And I think that's the way that we remain passionate and hopeful about mental health as well. So thanks very much for bringing us together.
Oh, thank you. Great. So if any of you would like to share your social medias or any upcoming projects, you're very welcome to, but don't feel like you have to. And I'd like to thank you all for being part of this conversation today. And thank you so much to the participants for Tech for Public Good for sending over the questions that prompted such an interesting conversation. So either wrap up by saying your social media handles or just goodbye. Over to you, Siobhan.
Well, for my own mental health, I don't really use social media. So yeah, I'll just say, thanks very much for having us. And I will kind of forward on some information about our projects as well. Thanks.
Thank you. Johnny?
Yeah, all our social media handles for the charities are at We Are Beyond. And we have our next mental health festival coming up in February. We'd love schools, colleges, universities to sign up. Everything's on our website, wearebeyond.org.uk. And yeah, we'd love as many of you there as possible.
Thank you so much. And Kate?
Yeah, I mean, you can find me on most social media, some of which isn't very professional. But if you look for at Leeds Mind on all platforms, where we try to do our best to be across all of them. And we have got a campaign out at the moment to try and get people's feedback around our next strategy and how we can best support people in Leeds. And I appreciate our audience is more global. But please do take a look at our social media feeds and feed into that if it's relevant to you. But thanks so much for such a great, honest and open conversation today. It's been really good fun.
Thank you so much. And yeah, thank you to everyone for being here. We are at Leeds_2023 on Twitter. And you can find us at leeds2023.co.uk. Thanks so much, everyone, for the great discussions today. And we'll be back soon with more. Thank you.